author in this book. We're doing Arnold Bennett. And the series of stories is called The Loot of Cities, The Adventures of a Millionaire in Search of Joy. Number 1. The Fire of London. "You wanted on the telephone, sir?" Mr. Bruce Bowring, managing director of the Consolidated Mining and Investment Corporation Limited, capital £2,001 shares, which stood at 27 and 6, turned and gazed querulously across the electric-lit spaces of his suburb private office at the confidential clerk who addressed him. Mr. Bowring, in shirt sleeves before a Florentine mirror, was brushing his hair with the solitude of a mother who has failed to rear most of her family. "Who is it?" he asked, as if that demand for him were the last straw but one. "Nearly 7 on Friday evening," he added, martyrized. "I think a friend, sir." The middle-aged financier dropped his gold-mounted brush and, wading through a pile of oriental carpet, passed into the telephone cabinet and shut the door. "Hello," he accosted the transmitter, resolved not to be angry with it. "Hello, are you there? Yes, I'm Bowring. Who are you?" The faint, inhuman voice on the receiver whispered in his ear. "Click. I'm a friend." "What name?" "No name. I thought you might like to know that a determined robbery is going to be attempted tonight at your house at Lowndes Square. A robbery of cash and before 9 o'clock. I thought you might like to know." "Ah," said Mr. Browning in the transmitter. The feeble exclamation was all he could achieve at first, in the confined, hot silence of the telephone cabinet. The message, coming to him mysteriously out of the vast unknown of London, struck him with a sudden sick fear that perhaps his wondrously organized scheme might yet miscarry, even at the final moment. Why, that night of all nights! Why before 9 o'clock? Could it not be that the secret was out then? "Is there any other further interesting details?" he inquired, bracing himself to the assumption of imperturbably and gay coolness. There was no answer, and when after some difficulty he got to the exchange girl to disclose the number which had hung up on him, he found that this interlocutor was using a public call office in Oxford Street. He returned to his room and donned his frock coat, took a large envelope from a locked drawer and put it in his pocket, and sat down to think a little. At that time, Mr. Bruce Bowring was one of the most famous conjurers of the city. He had begun 10 years earlier with nothing but a silk hat, and out of that empty hat he had produced some of the first Hoopla Limited, a South African gold mine of numerous stamps and frequent dividends. Then the Hoopla No. 2 Limited, a mine with the many reincarnations of Buddha, and then a dazzling succession of mines and combinations of mines. The more that hat emptied itself, the more it was full, and the emerging objects, which now included the house in Lowndes Square, and a perfect dream of a place in Hampshire, grew constantly larger, and the conjurer more impressive and persuasive, and the audience more enthusiastic in its applause. At last, with a unique flourish and a new turning up of sleeves to prove that there was notice, had come out of the hat that the CMIC, a sort of incredible, enormous Union Jack which wrapped all the other objects in its splendid folds. The shares of CMIC were affectionately known as a Khmer Circus as solids. They yielded handsome, though irregular dividends, earned chiefly by flotation and speculation. The circus believed in them, and in the view of the annual meeting of shareholders to be held on the following Tuesday afternoon, the conjurer in the chair and his hat on the table, The market price, after a period of depression, had stiffened. Mr. Bowring's meditations were soon interrupted by a telegram. He opened it and it read, "Cook drunk again. Will dine with you in Devonshire, 7:30. Impossible here. Have arranged about luggage. Marie." Marie was Mr. Bowring's wife. He told himself that he felt greatly relieved by the telegram. He clutched at it, and his spirits seemed to rise. At any rate, since he would not now go near Landau Square, he could certainly laugh at the threatened robbery. He thought what a wonderful thing Providence was, after all. "Just look at that," he said to his clerk, showing the telegram and with his humorous affirmation of dismay. "Tat, tat," said the clerk, discreetly sympathetic towards his employer, thus victimized by debauched cooks. "I suppose you're going to the Hampshire tonight as usual, sir?" Mr. Bowring replied that he was, and that everything appeared to be in order for the meeting, and that he should be back on Monday afternoon, or at the latest very early on Tuesday. Then, with a few parting instructions, and with that eagle glance around his room and into the circumjacent rooms which only a truly efficient head of affairs never omits on leaving business for the weekend, Mr. Bowring sedately yet magnificently departed from the noble registered offices of the CMIC. Why didn't Marie telephone instead of wiring, he mused, as his pair of greys whirled him and his coachman and his footman off to the Devonshire. Part 2. The Devonshire mansion, a bright edifice of 11 stories in the Foster and Dixie style, constructional ironwork by Homan, lifts by Waygood, decorations by Waring, and a terracotta by the Rood, is situate on the edge of Hyde Park. It is a composite building. Its foundations are firmly fixed in the tube railway. Above that comes the wine cellarage, and then the vast laundry, and then a row of windows scarcely level with the street, a sporting club, a billiard room, and a grill room, and a cigarette merchant whose name ends in Opolis. On the first floor of the renowned Devonshire Mansion Restaurant. Anyways, in London there is just one restaurant where, if you are entirely a correct person, you can get a decent meal. The place changes from season to season, but there is never more than one of it at a time. This season it happened to be the Devonshire. The chef of the Devonshire had invented tripe suppers, tripes à la mode de Caen, and these suppers, 6 and 7, had been the rage. Consequently, all entirely correct people fed as a matter of course at the Devonshire, since there was no other place fit to go to. The vogue of the restaurant favorably affected the vogue of the 9 floors of furnished suites above the restaurant. They were always full, and the heavenward attics where the servants took off their smart liveries and became human held much wealth. The vogue of the restaurant also exercised a beneficial influence over the status of the Kit Kat Club, which was a cock and hen club with the latest pattern and had its house on the 3rd floor. It was a little after 7:30 when Mr. Bruce Bowring haughtily ascended the grand staircase of this resort of opulence and paused for an instant near the immense fireplace at its summit. September was inclement, and the fire burned nicely. To inquire from the head waiter whether Mrs. Bowring had secured a table. But Marie had not arrived. Marie was never late. And uneasy and chagrined, he proceeded, under the escort of the head waiter, to a glimmering salle Louis Quatorze, and selected, because of his morning attire, a half-table hidden beyond an onyx pillar. The great room was moderately full of fair women and possessive men, despite the month. Immediately afterwards, a youngish couple, the man handsomer and better dressed than the woman, took the table on the other side of the pillar. Mr. Bowring waited 5 minutes, then he ordered Sole Monet and a bottle of Romane Conti, and then he waited another 5 minutes. He went somewhat in fear of his wife and did not care to begin without her. "Can't you read?" It was a youngish man at the next table, speaking in a raised voice to a squinting lackey with a telegraph form in his hand. Solids, my friend. Sell solids to any amount. Tomorrow and Monday. Got it? Well, send it off at once." "Quite clear, my lord," said the lackey, and fled. The youngish man gazed fixedly but absently at Mr. Bowring, and seemed to see him through the tapestry behind. Mr. Bowring, to his own keen annoyance, reddened, partly to conceal the blush and partly because it was 7:45. There was a train to catch. He lowered his face and began upon his soul. A few minutes later the lackey returned and gave some change to the youngish man and surprised Mr. Bowring by advancing towards him and handing him an envelope which bore on its flap the legend Kit Kat Club. The note within was scribbled in pencil in his wife's handwriting and just ran, "Just arrived, delayed by luggage. I'm too nervous to face the restaurant, and I'm eating in the shop here alone. The place is fortunately empty. Come and fetch me as soon as you're ready." Mr. Bowring sighed angrily. He hated his wife's club, and at this succession of messages, telephonic, telegraphic, and calligraphic, was exasperating him. "No answer," he ejaculated, and then he beckoned the lackey closer. "Who's that gentleman at the next table with the lady?" he murmured. "I'm not right sure, sir," was the whispered reply. "Some authorities say he's a strong man at the aquarium, while others affirm he's a sort of American millionaire." "But you addressed him as my lord." "Just then I thought he was a strong man, sir," but the lackey said, retiring. "My bill," Mr. Bowring demanded fiercely at the waiter, and at the same time the youngish gentleman and his companion rose and departed. At the lift, Mr. Bowring found the squinting lackey in charge. "You're liftman, too?" "Tonight, sir, I have many things. The fact is, the regular liftman has got a couple of hours off, being with the recent father of twins." "Well, Kit Kat Club." The lift seemed to shoot far upwards. Mr. Bowring thought the lackey had mistaken the floor, but on gaining the corridor he saw the portals in front of him and remembered the gold sign, "Kit Kat Club, members only." He pushed the door open and went in. Part 3. Instead of the familiar vestibule of his wife's club, Mr. Bowring discovered a small antechamber, and beyond, through a doorway half-screened by a portiere, he had a glimpse of a rich, rose-lit drawing-room. In the doorway, with one hand raised to the portiere, stood a youngish man who had forced him to blush at the restaurant. "I beg your pardon," said Mr. Bowring stiffly. "Is this the Kit Kat Club?" The other man advanced to the other door, and his brilliant eyes fixed on Mr. Bowring. His arms crept around the cheek of the door and came back bearing the gold sign. Then he shut the door and locked it. "No, this isn't the Kit Kat Club at all," he replied. "This is my flat. Come and sit down. I was expecting you." "I shall do nothing of the kind," said Mr. Bowring disdainfully. "But when I tell you that I know you are going to decamp tonight, Mr. Bowring—" The youngish man smiled affably. "Decamp?" The spine of the financier suddenly grew flaccid. "I use the word." "Who the devil are you?" snapped the financier, forcing his spine to rigidity. "I'm the friend on the phone. I especially wanted you at the Devonshire tonight, and I thought that the fear of robbery at Lowndes might make your arrival here more certain. I am he who devised the story of the inebriated cook and favored you with a telegram signed Marie. I am the humorist who pretended in a loud voice to send off a telegraphic instructions to sell solids in order to watch your demeanor under the test." I am the expert who forged your wife's handwriting in a note from the Kit Kat. I am the patron of the cross-eyed menial who gave you the notes to afterwards raise you too high in the lift. I am the artificer of the gold sign, an exact duplicate of the genuine one, 2 floors below. The witch induced you to visit me. The sign alone cost me 9 and 6, and the servant's livery came to £2.15. But I never consider expense when, by dint of a generous outlay, I can avoid violence. I hate violence. He gently waved the sign to and fro. Then my wife, Mr. Bowring stammered in a panic rage, is probably down square wondering what on earth has happened to you. Mr. Bowring took a deep breath and remembered that he was a great man and steadied himself. You must be mad, he remarked quietly. Open this door at once. Perhaps, the stranger judiciously admitted. Perhaps a sort of madness, but do come and sit down. We have no time to lose. Mr. Bowring gazed at the handsome face with the fine nostrils, large mouth, and square, clean chin, and the dark eyes and black hair and long moustache, and noticed the long, thin hands. Decadent, he decided. Nevertheless, and though it was more of the air of indulging in the caprice of a lunatic, he did, in fact, obey the stranger's request. It was a beautiful Chippendale drawing-room that he had entered, near the hearth to which a morsel of a fine fire gave cheerfulness, where 2 easy chairs, between them a small table. Behind was extended a fold draught screen. I can give you just 5 minutes, said Mr. Bowring, magisterially sitting down. They will suffice, the stranger responded, sitting down also. You have in your pocket, Mr. Bowring, probably your breast pocket, 50 Bank of England notes for £1,000 each, and a number of smaller notes amounting to another 10,000. Well? I must demand from you the first named 50. Mr. Bowring, in the silence of the rose-lit drawing-room, thought all of the Devonshire mansion, with its endless corridors and innumerable rooms, its acres of carpets, its forests of furniture, its gold and silver, its jewels and its wines, its pretty women and possessive men, the whole humming microcosm founded on one unanimous presence that the scarceness of property was natural law. And he thought how disconcerting it was that he should be trapped there, helpless, in the middle of a vast presence, and forced to admit to the scarceness of property was purely artificial convention. By what right do you make this demand? He inquired, bravely sarcastic. By my unique knowledge, said the stranger with a bright smile. Listen to what you and I alone know. You are at the end of the tether. My consolidated is in the same spot. You have a past consisting chiefly of 19 fraudulent flotations. You have paid dividends out of capital till there is no capital left. You have speculated and lost. You have cooked balance sheets to a turn and ruined the eyesight of auditors with dust. You have lived like 10 lords. Your houses are mortgaged. You own an unrivaled collection of unreceipted bills. You are worse than a common thief. Excuse these personalities. My dear good sir, Mr. Browsing erupted grandly. Permit me, what is more serious, your self-confidence has been gradually deserting you, at last perceiving that some blundering person was bound to put his foot through the brittle shell of your ostentation and tread on nothing, and foreseeing yourself an immediate future consisting chiefly of Holloway, You have, by a supreme effort of your genius, borrowed £60,000 a bank from the CMIC scrip for a week, eh? And you have arranged you and your wife to melt into thin air. You will affect to set out your usual for your country place in Hampshire, but it is Southampton that you will see tonight, and Havre will see you tomorrow. You may run over Paris to change some notes, but by Monday you will be on your way to, frankly, I don't know where, perhaps Montevideo. Of course, you take the risk of extradition, but the risk is preferable to the certainty that awaits you in England. I think you will elude extradition. If I thought otherwise, I should not have had you here tonight, because once extradited, you might begin to amuse yourself by talking about me.
So, it's blackmail, said Mr. Bowring grim.
The dark eyes opposite to him sparkled gaily. It desolates me, the youngish man observed, to have to commit you to the depth of only 10,000, but really not less than 50,000 will requite me from the brain tissue which I have expended on the study of your interesting situation.
Mr. Bowring consulted his watch.
Come now, he said luskily.
I'll give you 10,000. I flatter myself that I can look in the faces and the facts in the face, and so I'll give you 10,000.
My friend, answered the spider, you are a judge of character. Do you honestly think I don't mean precisely what I say to sixpence? It is 8:30. You are, if I may be allowed to remark, running rather fine.
And suppose I refuse to part, said Mr. Bowring with reflection. What then?
I've confessed to you that I hate violence. You would therefore leave this room unmolested, but you wouldn't step off the island.
Mr. Bowring scanned the agreeable features of the stranger. Then, while his lifts were ascending and descending, and the wine was sparkling, and the jewels flashing, and the gold clinking, and the pretty women being pretty, and in all 4 quarters of the Devonshire, Mr. Bruce Bowring, in the silent parlor, counted out 50 notes on the table. After all, it was a fortune, and a little pile of white on the crimson polished wood.
Bon voyage, said the stranger. Don't imagine that if I do not feel sympathy for you. I am. You have only been unfortunate. Bon voyage.
No, by heavens, Mr. Bowring almost shouted, rushing back from the door and drawing the revolver from his hip pocket. It's too much. I didn't mean to. But confound it, what's that revolver for? The youngish man jumped up quickly and put his hand on the notes.
Violence is always foolish, Mr. Bowring, he murmured.
Will you give them up, won't you?
I won't.
The stranger's fine eyes seemed to glint with joy at the drama. Then the revolver was raised, but in the same instant a tiny hand snatched it from the hand of Mr. Bowring, and turned and beheld at his side by the woman. A huge screen sank slowly and noiselessly to the floor in a surprising manner peculiar to screens that have been overset. Mr. Bowring cursed. An accomplice! I might have guessed. He grumbled in final disgust. He ran to the door, unlocked it, and was seen no more. Part 4. The lady was 27 or so, of medium height and slim, with a plain, very intelligent and expressive face, highlighted by courageous gray eyes, and crowned with loose, abundant, fluffy hair. Perhaps it was the fluffy hair, perhaps it was a mouth that twitched as she dropped the revolver, who can say, but the whole atmosphere of the rose-lit chamber was suddenly changed. The incalculable had invaded it. "You seem surprised, Miss Fincastle," said the possessor of the banknotes, laughing gaily. "Surprised?" echoed the lady, controlling her mouth. My dear Mr. Thorold, when strictly as a journalist I accepted your invitation, I did not anticipate this sequel. Frankly, I did not.
She tried to speak coldly and evenly, on the assumption that the journalist has no sex during business hours. But just then she happened to be neither less nor more a woman than a woman always is.
If I had the misfortune to annoy you,
Thorold threw up his arms in gallant despair.
Annoy is not the word,
said Mrs. Fincastle, smiling nervously.
May I sit down? Thanks. Let us recount. You arrive at England from somewhere as the son of the late heir of Thurles Thorold, the New York operator who died worth $6 million. It becomes known that while in Algiers in the spring you stayed at the Hotel St. James, famous as the scene of what was called the Algiers Mystery, familiar to English newspaper readers since last April. The editor of my journal therefore instructs me to obtain an interview with you. I do so. The first thing that I discover is that, though an American, you have no American accent. You explain this by saying that since infancy you have always lived in Europe with your mother.
But surely you do not doubt that I am Cecil Thorold, said the man. Their faces were approximately over the table.
Of course not. I merely recount to continue. I interview you as an Algerian mystery and get some new items concerning it. Then you regale me with tea and your opinions, and my questions grow more personal. So it comes about that, strictly on behalf of my paper, I inquire that your recreations are, and suddenly you answer, "Ah, my recreations! Come to dinner tonight, quite informally, and I will show you how I amuse myself." And suddenly I come and dine, and I'm stuck behind that screen and told to listen, and the millionaire proves to be nothing but a blackmailer.
You must understand, my dear lady.
I understand everything, Mr. Thorold, except your object submitting me to the scene.
A whim, cried Thorold rashly. A freak of mine, possibly due to the external and universal desire of a man to show off before a woman. The journalist tried to smile, but something in her face caused Thorold to run a sharpener. "Drink this," he said, returning with a glass.
"I need nothing,"
the voice of a whisper.
"Oh, oblige me."
Miss Fincastle drank and coughed.
"Why did you do it?" she asked sadly, looking over the notes. "You don't mean to say," Thorold burst out, "that you're feeling sorry for Mr. Bruce Bowring? He has merely parted with what he stole, and the people from whom he stole. And the activities which center about the stock exchange are simply various manipulations of one primal instinct. Suppose I had not interfered. No one would have been a penny the better off except Mr. Bruce Bowring, whereas—" "You intend to restore this money to Consolidated?" said Miss Fincastle eagerly. Not quite. The Consolidated doesn't deserve it. You must not regard its shareholders as a set of innocent shorn lambs. They knew the game. They went in for what they could get. Besides, how could I restore the money without giving myself away? I want the money myself." "But you are a millionaire." "It is precisely because I'm a millionaire that I want more. All millionaires are like that." "I'm sorry to find you a thief, Mr. Thorold." "A thief? No, I am only direct. I only avoid the middleman. At dinner, Miss Fincastle, you displayed somewhat advanced views about property, marriage, and the aristocracy of brains. You said that labels were for the mere stupid majority, and that the wise majority examined the ideas behind the labels. You label me as a thief, but examine the idea, and you will perceive that you might as well call yourself a thief. Your newspaper every day suppresses the truth about the city, and it does so in order to live. In other words, it touches the pitch it precipitates in the game. Today it has a 50-line advertisement for a false balance sheet of the Consolidated, at 2 shillings a line. That £5, part of the loot at Great City, will help to pay you for your account of our interview this afternoon."
Our interview tonight, Miss Fincastle corrected him stiffly, and all that I have seen and heard.
At these words she stood up, and as Cecil Thorogood gazed at her, his face changed.
I shall begin to wish, he said slowly, that I had deprived myself of the pleasure of your company this evening. You might have been a dead man had you done so, Miss Fincastle retorted, and observing his blank countenance, she touched the revolver. Have you forgotten already? She asked tartly. Of course it hasn't been loaded, he remarked. Of course I had seen to that earlier the day. I'm not such a bungler. Then I didn't save your life? You forced me to say that you did not, and to remind you that you gave me your word not to emerge from behind the screen. However, seeing the motive, I can only thank you for that lapse. The pity is that hopelessly it compromises you. Me? Exclaimed Miss Fincastle. You. Can't you see that you're in on it, in on this robbery? To give the thing a label. You were alone with the robber. You secured the robber at a criminal moment. Accomplice, Mr. Bowring himself said. My dear journalist, the episode of the revolver, empty though as the revolver was, seals your lips.
Miss Fincastle laughed rather hysterically, leaning over the table with her hands on it.
My dear Millionaire, she said rapidly, you don't know what's new journalism to which I have the honor to belong. You would know it better if you had lived in New York. All I had to announce is that, compromised or not, a full account of this affair will appear in my paper tomorrow morning. No, I shall not inform the police. I am a journalist simply, but a journalist I am. And you give your promise, which you gave me before going behind the screen, your solemn promise that you would reveal nothing. I was loath to mention it. Some promises, Mr. Thorogood, it is a duty to break, and it is my duty to break this one. I should never have given it had I had the slightest idea of the nature of your recreations.
Thorogood still smiled, though faintly.
Really, you know, he murmured, this is getting just a little serious. It is serious, she stammered.
And then Thorogood noticed that the new journalist was softly weeping. Part 5. The door opened.
Miss Kitty Satyrus, said the erstwhile liftman, who was now in plain clothes and had mysteriously ceased to squint.
A beautiful girl, a girl who had remarkable loveliness and was aware of it, one of the prettiest women in Devonshire, ran impulsively into the room and caught Miss Fincastle by the hand.
My dearest Eve, why are you crying? What's the matter? Lecky, said Thorogood aside to the servant, I told you to admit no one.
The beautiful blonde turned sharply to Thorogood.
I told him I wished to enter, she said imperiously, half closing her eyes. Yes, that was it. The lady wished to enter.
Thorogood bowed.
That was sufficient, he said. That will do, Lecky. Yes, sir. But I say, Lecky, next time when you address me publicly, try to remember that I am not in the peerage.
The servant squinted.
Certainly, sir, as he retired. Now we are alone, said Miss Satyrus. Introduce us, Eve, and explain.
Miss Fincastle, having regained self-control, introduced her dear friend, the radiant star of the Regency Theatre, and her acquaintance, the Millionaire.
Eve didn't feel quite sure of you, the actress stated, and so we arranged that if she wasn't up by my flat by 9 o'clock, I was to come down to the rencontre. What have you been doing to make Eve cry? Unintentional, I assure you, Thorogood began. There's something between you two, said the serious Kitty Sartorius sagaciously, in significant accents. What is it?
She sat down and touched her picture hat, smoothed her white gown, and tapped her foot.
What is it now, Miss Thorold? I think you had better tell me.
Thorold raised his eyebrows and obediently commenced the narration, standing with his back to the fire.
How perfectly splendid, Kitty exclaimed. I'm so glad you cornered Mr. Bowring. I met with him one night, and I thought he was horrid. And what are these notes? Well, all of the...
Thorold proceeded with his story. "Oh, but you can't do that, Eve," said Kitty, suddenly serious.
You can't go and split. It would mean all sorts of bother. Your wretched newspaper would be sure to keep you on hanging about in London, and we shouldn't be able to start our holiday tomorrow. Even I start quite evening on Thorold, Mr. Thorold. We begin to Ostend."
"Indeed," said Thorold. "I, too, am going that direction soon. Perhaps we may meet."
"Oh, I hope so,"
Kitty smiled, and then she looked at Eve Fincastle.
"You really mustn't do that, Eve," she said.
I must, said Miss Fincastle, insisting, clenching her hands.
"And she will,"
said Kitty tragically, after considering her friend's face.
"She will, and our holiday's ruined. I can see it. I see it plainly. She's in one of her stupid, conscientious moods. She's fearfully advanced and careless of unconventional theory, Eve is. But when it comes to practice... Oh, Mr. Thorold, you have to knot something into this dreadful knot. Why did you want those notes so very particularly?"
"I didn't want them very particularly."
"Well, anyhow, it's a most peculiar predicament. Mr. Bowring doesn't count, and the consolidated thingamagummy isn't any of the worse off. Nobody suffers who wouldn't ought to. It is your unlawful gain that's wrong. Why not pitch the wretched notes in the fire?"
Kitty laughed at her own playful humor. "Certainly," said Thorold, and with a quick movement he put the 50 notes in the grate, where they were made a bluish-yellow flame. Both women screamed and sprang up.
"Mr. Thorold! Mr. Thorold!" "He's adorable," Kitty breathed.
The incident, I venture to hope, is now closed, and Thorold calmly, but with his dark eyes sparkling. "I must thank you both for a very enjoyable evening. Some day, perhaps, I may have the opportunity of further explaining my philosophy to you."